Maggie, thank you for joining the Anatomy of a Founder podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to have you. And I'm going to start it off by asking you what the most interesting thing is that's happened to you this week.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see your response to this one. But the most interesting thing that's happened to me in the past 2 weeks is I got a concussion.
A concussion?
2 weeks ago Saturday. Yeah,
Okay.
so I horseback ride and had an incident that resulted in a rapid and unplanned dismount and me spending a couple hours in the A&E and ended up with a concussion.
Wow, okay. Where were you riding horses anyway?
So, yeah, I ride a couple places around London, up in North Hull, and then out in Bucks County.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a hobby I've found again in adulthood and something that just brings me a lot of joy. And it's something I do just for me, which as a founder and a mom, not many things in my life I can say that about. But yeah, so that is, I've never been concussed before. That was a journey.
That's a learning curve?
Yeah, that was learning curve. You just get really tired, I learned. So yeah.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess not interesting, but interesting is a weird and interesting word to use in this concept. So without repeating it, I guess what was the takeaway from that moment? I'm sure you were out for a few days, and being a founder, you don't really have days to take off like that. So.
Yeah. So, the takeaway was actually a little more existential, I think, than just, take a rest, take care of yourself. So when you make a mistake with horseback riding, especially a mistake that ends with you falling off the horse, there's sort of two ways you can approach it. And there's two ways my trainer and I have approached it in the past. The first is you give a lot of space for the knocking confidence, the nervous system shift that probably happens, and you kind of ease back into things. So the next ride, you take it very slowly, you engage in activities that are going to build confidence. But the other approach you can take is to, in the words of Ted Lasso, be a goldfish. Pretend like it didn't happen. Get right back on. Cheesy, get right back on the horse. And just move on with your training in a way that doesn't allow you to dwell on what happened. And so that's actually the route that we chose to go this time. It was the most serious fall I've ever had. I've had falls before where we've kind of eased back into things, but this time we really felt it was best to kind of ignore that it happened. And I think my biggest takeaway was using that mentality and applying it to what we're building at Phase, and applying it to my role as a founder, because I am a sucker for feedback. I'm a sucker for postmortems. Give me, an opportunity. We literally in our founder meetings have an oops agenda item where we like to dig in and review mistakes. But I think what that situation taught me is sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself and for your business is to move on quickly. Don't spend too much time dwelling on what you could have done better, because you often then spend time and resources and energy making mountains out of molehills when, the molehill itself is really insignificant and, has a very low impact on your business.
Wow. Who knew that you could learn so much from a concussion?
Yeah. Killing brain cells and building them at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, making the most out of a, not so great situation is the takeaway from that.
Exactly.
And you mentioned Phase, so I guess this is the time that you can introduce the audience a little bit about yourself and what you're building with Phase.
Yeah, absolutely. So Maggie McDaris, I am the CEO and one of 3 co-founders of a product called Phase. Phase really is looking to redefine what productivity means for women. We are a biology-based tool to help women understand how the hormone shifts that occur throughout their hormone cycle impact their cognition and subsequently impact how they show up at work. So we have a digital app which gives women information based on where they are in their cycle on what's going on cognitively and the types of tasks and productivity themes that they are optimized for in that moment. And then we also have integrations into common workplace tools, so things like Google Workspace, Office 365, that applies that information for our users and really meets them where they're working so that we take on the mental load of applying these cycle syncing concepts in the workplace.
You explain it a lot better than I was trying to. I wrote about it recently. But it's a complex space, it's very, intricate, and it has so many different layers.
Yeah.
And I know you have quite a good story to tell about how you've come to have this light bulb moment with it. So do you want to walk us through how you met your co-founder, how you came up with the idea? I know you had some experience in working with startups before, drank the Kool-Aid, did the whole shabam that way.
Yeah.
So do you want to just walk us through how you had that moment?
Absolutely. So, it's really funny. Yes, I'd been involved in startups before, and I know you and I have kind of talked about that journey, but within the context of those startups, had you asked me, do you want to go on and do your own thing? At the time, I would have said absolutely not. I loved my role as sort of a right-hand man, kind of the builder in that space. And so it was a really interesting journey for me to get to the point where, I kind of entered into my own founder journey. So my co-founder and I, we met through a program in Portugal. It's called Boundless Life. It's incredible. If you ever get a chance to look into it, it really helps families who want to show their kids the world. It allows them to do that through providing kind of resources and an infrastructure. So they provide housing, a co-working space, and schooling/summer camp in their summer cohort, which allows families to basically be digital nomads together, which is incredible. And so Georgie and I met summer of 2023 through that program. Georgie Powell, who is one of my additional co-founders, and she and I actually met wild swimming together. We love, and this, one of the themes, hopefully, of what we'll talk about today is, and I think one of my strengths as a founder is building relationships. Never discount an opportunity to build a relationship, get to know someone, what they care about, because the opportunities it might open up for you down the line, are immense. And so Georgie and I met because we both loved wild swimming, and we, in kind of a shared WhatsApp group, coordinated a time when we could go do that. And in doing so, got to know one another and bonded over a shared experience in learning about our hormones. We are both in our mid to late 30s, understanding how our hormones were affecting how we showed up at work, affecting how we showed up in our families. And so we really bonded over that shared journey. So my journey was a cliched one, if you will. So you mentioned I'd been a part of the startup world before. I really suffered an immense burnout as a result of my previous startup journey. So I was a part of a startup that grew, I think our CAGR at one point, I think the average was 220%. I mean, we were growing really fast. I had my daughter in 2021, and because it was the US, I came back after 10 weeks, and my body never really recovered. At the time, I was launching the new consulting division of that business. And so I dealt with chronic anemia. I dealt with insane periods symptomatically. I had my hair falling out. I was sick constantly. And, my body basically failed to support what I was trying to accomplish professionally. And so in my healing journey, I worked with a functional dietitian. I worked with a few medical practitioners. I started to align my work with my hormone cycle. That was my introduction into the concept of cycle syncing as a whole, but specifically how it could impact myself cognitively, and how it impacted the skills I had access to every day of the month. And so Georgie and I had a very similar experience. And so we were at this dinner, this networking dinner with all the women in this group in Portugal, and as it often does in these women-filled spaces, the conversation turned to our periods and our hormones and how women, the women in this group had kind of overcome the challenges of having a cycle and being a woman who cares about her career, who cares about her professional trajectory. And Georgie and I bonded over the fact that the conversation made us sad, because what we had learned is that if you can understand what's happening cognitively across your cycle, it's actually a tool you can use to hack your productivity. It's a tool you can use to show up not just surviving your hormonal fluctuations, but actually leveraging them in a way that positively impacts your work. And so that night, that July night in Portugal in 2023, was really when the idea of Phase was born. I, at the time, had just left my previous startup. What I had said was I was going to take 6 months to figure out the next thing. By the first week of August, she and I had already set up a brainstorming session to figure out, okay, is there something to this, right? Mm-hmm. So, that's really the story of how Phase was born.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. And within those two bits that you just talked about, so you like to ride horses,
yes,
and wild swim. So it seems like you have a lot of like active hobbies, outdoor hobbies. Is that something that helps you kind of just connect with yourself, because I know I speak with a lot of founders who have, you know, some have to run in the morning, some have to listen to certain types of podcasts to get their mind going. It sounds like a trend that I'm sensing, but I'm unsure. Is that something that you've always been involved with, is just keeping yourself?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, so my background is in wellness generally. Before all of this, I was a registered dietitian. So I've always been adjacent to the wellness space. So wellness and sort of moving my body, eating well has been important to me. But I do think the imperative nature of those things in my life is very much a reflection of where I am now as a founder. And I think it has something to do with the fact that as a founder, you have a lot of responsibility. You're making a lot of decisions. You are caring often, not just for your employees or your business, but, you know, the people in your life, in your personal life. And so there's very little margin to do things that are just for your own fulfillment. As much as I would love to say, you know, starting a business is all for my own fulfillment, you know, I think we know that's not true. And so being really intentional with space for hobbies, I do think becomes incredibly important. For me, that is things that moves my body. I, in addition to being a founder, have ADHD. And so I find my brain gets the most rest when it's engaged in something physically. Swimming especially is just, I think, a hack for me to still my brain and get cognitive rest. So yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't know if I've explored the relationship too extensively, but I have joked before that, you know, at post phase, whatever that looks like, I have a passion for helping adult women find hobbies that are life-giving, because horseback riding, swimming, running, all of those things are so incredibly life-giving to me and fill me up that in a way that fuels everything else I have to do in my life.
No, it's a really interesting topic because I've been exploring it lately in terms of like this founder metamorphosis, like how you change as your company changes. And so a lot of people are so focused on that business growth, the cash flow, the financials, the moving, the scaling, the fundraising, and then they forget about themselves. And ultimately that just creates a not so good ripple effect because they're not, you know, working on their leadership abilities. They're not working on themselves. They're coming into the work and into the office and they're not feeling like themselves. And that just like echoes back onto the employees, onto the staff, onto the culture. And so I think a lot of people do forget to, it feels selfish when you spend time working on yourself, but ultimately it's the opposite because it's going to affect the company that you're leading.
100%. Have you found that to be true for yourself? I'm curious. Obviously, you guys are building a lot here. Have you found a hobby or a sport or something where you can go and kind of disconnect with everything
100%. Yeah. As common as it is, I run. So I've actually been experiencing, or I've been trying to explore weird hobbies. I don't know what that looks like, but someone had told me once that they have to listen to like techno every morning in order to like engage their brain. That, not so normal. Like, but you hear about people running all the time. But it does give my serotonin a boost. My feet, like I just feel so on form when I'm doing something active. So I really do think, and I think running was one of like the top trending sports of last year.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you know, to bring it back to business, some of the really exciting innovation that's happening, you know, in the tech space is happening within the running space, kind of that balance of something that is wellness focused, but also really community focused. I think running apps, you look at Runna, their recent acquisition, you know, they're a really interesting model to look at. Do you train for races or is running sort of a joy only hobby?
I've just started using Runna.
Okay.
I have. So I'm getting into that training mode, but my partner's, he's training for a marathon. So I'm like, I have the FOMO feeling where I'm like, that'll take me a bit, but maybe I'll get there eventually. But it is kind of like, it also gives you that self confidence when you're like accomplishing things that you set out to. So instead of just running here and there, to have a strict schedule with it. But even your company, Phase, it's all about like self-improvement, productivity. And maybe that's just the era in which we're entering now. Like people are really focusing on themselves and what can make themselves better in the workplace and their personal lives. So yeah, maybe that is the trend that we're just tapping into.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially when you're building a product that is so outspoken about supporting women in a way that is aligning with their physiology. It would be incredibly contradictory and hypocritical of us to not allow our founding team space to engage in hobbies, whether it be swimming or running. Georgie, my co-founder, has done an Ironman. I mean, Sam also likes to run. So, it would be incredibly hypocritical of us to not create space as a founding team. And I would say in general, we don't really buy into that startup hustle culture. Potentially it's a little PTSD from my previous experience and seeing the negative impact. But at my core, I do believe that you can have a family and healthy social life and also be a part of a really fast growing company. You just have to prioritize ruthlessly, make really intentional and strategic decisions about how you're spending your time. Understand that flexibility doesn't always mean not working on the weekends. That sometimes flexibility means you are able to work on the weekends because you did something during the weekday, that was not related to work.
I was at a conference in Portugal and someone asked one of the panelists, do you have to be an asshole to be successful? And I thought that was a brilliant question.
Great question.
But I think you just answered it ultimately because, I think, and I also wrote a piece recently about ambition and how people view that word. And I think sometimes it's like you feel like you're not ambitious enough or you're not moving at the pace in which other people are. And it's so competitive.
Yeah.
But ultimately, people start businesses for so many different reasons. It's not all... You have to find your why. And once you find your why, then that's all that matters. That's your ambition. That's your drive. It's unique to everybody.
Exactly. As a fellow expat, I'm really curious your perspective on ambition.
Yeah, we're both American, aren't we?
Yeah. So I'm and especially because I know you're a former Carolinian as well. I'm really curious your perspective on ambition.
Yeah.
Within the context of American in the UK building a business. I have thoughts, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. First thoughts that come to mind is I've interviewed so many American founders and so many British founders. The one thing I find difference in terms of ambition is a lot of people think that, in America you have to move fast and break things and do this really quickly and fail really quickly. And I think that there's a possibility of doing that, but at your own pace. And also I fear that some British founders as well think that it's not okay to fail, and they're terrified to tell me about their failures and I'm like, and their mistakes, and even though they could easily turn it and probably tell me what they learned from it, but I think so many people are looking for those failures and those mistakes and those learnings, and no matter what pace, no matter what ambition you have, those are gonna happen. But I think it's an overly used word in a way that people think there's a hard and fast definition of it.
It's a great
and point. I just don't think there is, because I wouldn't say that the UK, for example, is less ambitious than the US.
Agreed.
Would I say that some of the mentalities are a bit different when it comes to how they define that? Maybe. So it is very, very interesting.
And the level you're allowed to express that ambition. I think that's the major difference that I find is in the UK, you're ambitious, but you don't talk about it.
And once you do, you're kind of above your...
Exactly. It's, no tall poppies.
You go down.
Exactly. Whereas in the US, I think it's much more commonplace to talk about your ambitions, to go out and say, we want to be a unicorn. We want to be $100 million business. We want XYZ valuation on acquisition. Whereas here,
so true.
I think... it's been funny because I'm the only American within the context of two, British co-founders. Sometimes I see their reactions to things I'll say, or I'm like, well, it's a learning curve for both of us. But I would say, being comfortable with being outwardly ambitious is a great tool I can access actually as an expat here.
Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to speak your dreams into existence, even if they don't come true? But maybe some people are just afraid that they won't. But dream big, aim high, and you can only go up from there, really. I guess that's
true. But I will say one of the gifts of our founding team at Phase, so as I mentioned, I have two co-founders, Georgie Powell and Sam Cook, and between the three of us, we do have varying levels of that I would call mine founder delusion, right? Down to realism. So I'm sort of the buoy of optimism. I believe we are going to achieve whatever the best possible version. Georgie, I would say, is a cautious optimist. She believes that. She might be less outspoken, and she's also very aware of everything that could go wrong on the road to that. And then Sam is our realist. He is... okay, guys, we have to accomplish A, B, C. And he keeps us really grounded in terms of expectations so that, we're steady as a founding team. And so, as much as we can talk about the differences, I think that's actually one of the beauties of the founding team we've assembled at Phase is we bring different skill sets, but we also bring different mindsets to the table. And that is an incredible strength for our team.
No, 100%. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget to think about. Well, A, when building a business, but B, when they're thinking about these like innovation hubs of the world. Silicon Valley, for example. Yeah. Not everybody is born and bred in Silicon Valley. The reason it works so well is because there's such a diversity of mindsets and ambition and thinking and ways of viewing the world. And that's just what harnesses that moving forward. I am curious though, as to, your career working with startups and, burning out, but then starting your own company within not the 6 months time that you gave yourself after you left your other one. Is there any one thing that you've learned about yourself and how you operate? Maybe you don't have to be, you talk about having these big dreams and saying it out loud, but is there anything that you've learned about yourself in the past few years?
How much time do we have? I've learned a lot of things on my founder journey. I would say one is the importance of relationship building. And this is something I learned from my previous CEO, she was a magician when it came to networking. If we had a problem, if we had a need, she knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who could become a resource for us. And she never took for granted any conversations that she had. And that's something, both because my gifts tend to lie in conversation and relationship building, but also in the context of business that I have really grasped onto. I think it's one of the things that's allowed Phase to have a lot of early success before launch. We were able to, participate in the FemTech Lab Accelerator. We have an incredible network of industry leaders and thought leaders who are testing our product, who are cheerleading our product. We've built an incredible team of advisors. We have an amazing clinical team who's helping us actually build the product. We've got an incredible brand specialist who has given us a consumer grade brand well beyond, I think, where we've graduated to from a technical standpoint. And so for me, really keeping a perspective on the importance of building those relationships, you get a lot of conversation from founders around prioritizing your time and making sure every conversation you have is valuable. And I think sometimes that means we preemptively disqualify that coffee chat, that person who reached out to us. And yes, you have to absolutely prioritize your time. But for me, if there's an opportunity to find time to have that conversation, I will, because you never know how that relationship's going to unfold. Something else I've learned is, and it's something I evangelize and we have implemented at Phase, is the idea of radical candor. So if you know Kim Scott and her book, it's basically this idea of ask for feedback often, give feedback often, create a culture where that is happening. And sometimes the most kind thing you can do is to be very clear with that feedback. I've experienced in business times, where we get taught about the feedback sandwich and it's compliment, negative feedback, compliment. But sometimes what that does is it asks your teammate or your employee to do some detective work to figure out what you're actually saying to them or where they can actually improve. And so for us, we are big on feedback. We're big on a culture of kind feedback, but being very clear about what we mean when we're providing feedback and communicating with each other. So that's another thing that I've, learned from my previous experience that I brought into this founder journey. And then the third one, and I would say this is my biggest learning now that I sit, with the title of founder and CEO, which is trusting my gut. When you start a business, you will be faced with a lot of opinions. And if you're doing it well, you should be, right? You're going to be meeting with people who've been there before. You're having conversations with investors and industry leaders. But there is the temptation to respond to all of it. And one of the skills that's been refined for me over the last 18 months since starting Phase is really identifying the times when it's important to trust my gut, to take that feedback and go, thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'm going to go this way. And that has been a major learning curve, but also something I've really been enjoying moving into since becoming a founder.
On the topic of trust as well, I think it's really interesting because another theme I've been trying to explore is when the right time is to start. And it's obviously an impossible question to answer with like a hard and fast answer.
Yeah.
But I am curious as to what you think about that question, because, you had a career working in startups, having these learnings, these lessons, like learning from people around you, then you were able to take those learnings and apply it to what you're doing today.
Yeah.
If you were to go back 10 years, would you have been able to start Phase? Would you have started Phase if the idea came to you? Would there be anything you did differently?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say the short answer is pretty simple. It's no. I think a couple things. I have a lot of opinions on sort of serial entrepreneurs,
Okay,
and I think it's something I shied away from initially, sort of being bucketed in with, because I don't want to start a business simply to start a business. That is not going to motivate me enough to do it and do it well. For me, starting a business would have had to been linked to something that I'm incredibly passionate about, something that I feel sort of a moral obligation to bring into the world. We mentioned in passing, my background is in wellness, specifically kind of in the public health space. So for me, I need to feel really connected to the mission and the vision of the business for it to motivate me to be involved, and especially to motivate me to the type and volume of work that is, starting a business entails. So I don't think if I'd had the idea for Phase 10 years ago, I would have been in a place to start it, because one, my personal journey with burnout and cycle syncing was such a massive impetus for the idea of Phase, and I hadn't experienced that yet. Me as a 22-year-old, or that was not 10 years ago, 26-year-old, probably didn't have the same perspective and didn't have the same level of responsibility in my life that a tool like Phase would have been necessary. Whereas now, given my journey and experience through burnout and recovery, and understanding how my cycle and, syncing my work with a cycle was a huge part of that, sort of lit the fire in me to want to bring a solution to other women like me. So that's the first reason. The second reason is, my old CEO and I used to joke, because she would, if I did something well, she'd say, "You're coming for my job." And I'd be like, "Absolutely not. Never.
Don't want it.
Don't want it. Never wanted it." And so, and she was a solo founder. And a huge part of why I never wanted her job is because I would look at what she had to deal with and the weight she had to bear solo. So the other thing that made this the right time was the team that I am building Phase with. Without Georgie and Sam, I do not think Phase would exist. The skills they bring, the way that we can depend on each other when one of us is having a high or a low week to kind of, bring the ship up as a whole, that to me is essential for Phase's success. And it's essential for my journey and my ability to show up as a founder, knowing that even though I have the title of CEO, we all bear the burden of that founder title, and that increase in surface area decreases the pressure on any of us individually. And so timing wise, I needed my own journey and story to inspire me to build the product. And also I needed a support system to sort of buoy me into the role of CEO and founder.
It's interesting because personally, I've been noticing a lot of younger people wanting to start businesses, like people who don't want to go to university or people who are in university. And I noticed in someone's Twitter bio the other day that it was like, trying to build my company so I can drop out of Northeastern. And I was like, bold, okay. But there's this trend of people wanting to do their own thing. They want the autonomy. They want this. But as you said, sometimes you need that personal attachment to it and that vision and the mission with it that kind of drives you to get past those really difficult times and the pressure and the intensity. So what would your advice be to someone coming out of university? They want their own business so badly, but they also want that idea. How do you find it? Like, does it just come to you, or is there a way? What would your advice be to someone who's just craving that entrepreneurialism?
Yeah, I'd say first start with yourself. What is the problem you need solved in your life? Is it where are there areas for efficiency? Where are there areas for an improved experience? Where are there things you're struggling with where the solutions either aren't adequate or are not available? Start with a problem that you experience, because it is much easier to create a real solution to a problem that exists for you than your perception of a problem that exists. Because if you start with a problem that you don't experience, then there's a lot of supposition around how you solve for that problem versus a problem that you experience. So that's, in my mind, a really good starting point is don't go out looking to start a business, go out looking to solve a problem. Because where there's a problem you're experiencing, there are probably lots of other people who are experiencing that. So you've got a built-in market. So I would say that's step number one. I'd say step number two is maybe spend some time investigating what it is about building a business that excites you. Is it the autonomy of being your own boss? Do you have to start a full-fledged, SaaS business to do that? Or are there other opportunities? Is it the money? Because there's lots of roles that are going to make you a lot more money initially than being a founder. I would spend some time investigating what it is about being an entrepreneur, what it is about, being a business owner that really excites you. Because if you can identify those things, it will, one, better equip you to build a business that's going to work for you versus some blueprint that you're looking towards. But two, it might help mitigate some expectations or open up some other opportunities that are not kind of so narrow of, I want to go out and build my own business. My third piece of advice is there a way you can practice? I think one of the best things that ever happened to me was joining a startup as employee number 3, not employee number 1, because it gave me the experience where I was able to build a company from the ground up. I saw the struggles and challenges of that. I also got to reap the benefits of that. I learned so much being a part of a small team. I honed skills in doing that then have set me up with phase for success, in my first attempt going out on my own. So yeah, first, is there a problem in your life that you can solve? Second, why do you really want to start a business? Is there a way you can meet those needs otherwise? And third, is there a way you could practice first and find people in your life to learn from before you jump off the deep end?
On the practice bit, I can't remember who I was listening to the other day on a podcast, but they said it's kind of similar because they said something about risk taking and how some people are kind of just born into being able to be natural risk takers, and some people have to practice.
Yeah.
And so their advice was to take risks on things that are reversible. So do it safely.
Yeah.
And then you can do it on the big steps.
It's really interesting.
But then also on the why part of things, I also found it interesting because back to the topic of ambition and culture, so many people are just kind of impatient. And I find patience is a virtue when it comes to startup land. And yeah, I guess, is there any time that you've had to really test your patience? I'm sure there's many, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're looking at building a tech product, you're always going to have your patience tested because there are always going to be things. And I so appreciate Sam. He does a really good job of managing our expectations when it comes to timelines. He's very reticent to give a specific timeline. And I can hear all the product managers cheering because there's just so many unknowns when it comes to, whether it's a third-party tool that you're having to integrate with or the way a user actually ends up using something that you've designed versus how you've designed it. So, I think patience when you're building something and building it well is exceptionally important. I also think patience is important when it comes to the hard times, when there are challenges, whether they be personnel or market driven. For us at my previous company, we survived COVID. And for us, patience looked like, one, where there are opportunities to innovate in this space, but two, how can we double down on the value that we're bringing our clients today and wait out this massive unknown rather than being highly reactive to it. So, we obviously took time to identify the opportunities that existed within the way the world changed, but a lot of what we did was batten down the hatches, pretty much. And that's not a very popular or shiny or exciting way to run a startup, but it worked for us. And there were competitors who did not survive the pandemic when we did because we were able to sort of wait out the storm. Yeah.
Good. And for another P word on perfectionism, I know that we talked about how or prior to this, about how phase doesn't really push the idea of perfect because it's all about knowing your body for who you are, what you're going through, all of the different cycles that you're experiencing. And some days you're just not going to be on top form, and other days you'll have that quality trait that you're looking for. But in terms of like perfection in startup land and being a founder, I was recently speaking to someone who said that they're just a perfectionist. That's why they're a solo founder. Like sometimes it's just really difficult because they want things to be how they were. Guess you could probably say Steve Jobs was a perfectionist because he was always looking at everything, copy, marketing, advertisements, the product, and he was like, nope, got to do it this way. What's your take on perfectionism in founder world?
I'm hesitant to go on record contradicting Steve Jobs.
I mean, I think you're not the only one to do that, but
you know, I think perfectionism can be an Achilles heel for founders. Founders often are really good at what they do because they can wear a lot of hats. They can have opinions on everything. That doesn't mean that they always should. Definitely when it comes to a product, when you are in the process of refining product market fit, perfectionism means you release too late. You release a more complete version of a product. And what that actually means is you end up having to undo more than you really needed to. You want to bring a product to market that is, you know, consumer grade enough that it doesn't break when people use it, that it adds value from day one. But for us at Phase, we know that the version of Phase that's launching very soon is not going to be the same version that exists in 6 months, because in creating sort of an interim version, a not perfect version, we allow space for our users to communicate with us. If you put something perfect into the world, that creates a barrier of communication between you and your user. It's much harder to change something that is complete, or maybe a better way to put it is much easier to steer a moving ship. If you're thinking in a way that is iterative around the product that you're bringing to market, it allows you to be flexible and reactive and responsive to the needs of that market. That's where, you know, I think my background in public health becomes really valuable. You can't be a perfectionist and solve a problem for someone, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who define what that problem is for them. They're the ones who define what the perfect solution is, not you. And so your perfectionism is going to butt heads with their perfect solution. And so for me, combating perfectionism is something that I practice on a daily basis. Now, do you want to send an email that has copy errors? Absolutely not, right? You know, there are areas of the business where perfectionism can be really valuable. But at a high level, sort of strategic place, I think perfectionism can really be a barrier to fast growth, rapid value add to your consumer, and obviously rapid revenue.
And so then there's perfectionism, there's patience. We've talked a lot about personality traits, characteristics. I'm just curious as to what you think it really takes to be a founder. Because some of these people just naturally have, some of these people have to learn. But what do you think it takes to take that leap?
Yeah. So I think there is not one size fits all to being a founder. So let me caveat what I'm about to say with that. I think the beauty of what I've learned, especially within the women's health space, especially within the femtech space, where you've got founders who were scientists first, and then you've got, you know, founders who did other things in the wellness space first. There is no one size fits all, and who you are as a founder needs to fit the business that you're trying to build. That being said, I do think there are some overarching themes that make a founder successful. Number one is to be curious. If you are curious about your market, if you are curious about your problem, about the product, that leading with curiosity often leads to incredibly impactful solutions. From a culture standpoint, leading with curiosity also means you facilitate a really healthy company culture that allows your team to ask questions, that allows your team to challenge and push. And that is a skill that I spend a lot of time trying to foster. I'm not sure if you've read Adam Grant. He has a book called Think Again.
No.
And in it, he outlines sort of the 4 archetypes of how you respond when you are presented with information that might contradict what you think you knew or what you believed. And people can fall into 4 categories. So they can either be a preacher, so someone who kind of finds the moral high ground, sticks with it regardless of what the evidence might say. You've got the lawyer. That's someone who wants to just sit and poke holes when new evidence is presented. You have the politician. That's the person who never really picks a side and is just sort of like, it could be this, it could be this, but kind of stays stuck in indecision. And then you have the scientist. And the scientist is the person who says, here's this evidence, let's weigh one against the other, and let's be willing to form a different conclusion than the one we brought to the conversation. And so that language has really helped me foster curiosity, because I think if you are curious, when that new information comes up, you don't go, oh, wait, that's different than what we built a product around, or, oh, wait, that's different than what I thought, or, oh, we planned this whole 6-month marketing campaign. You go, interesting, tell me more. And it allows you space to then make decisions that are not reactive, that are, collaborative. And for me, that curiosity is a key part of being a successful founder.
No, it's interesting. Someone actually recently told me that one thing they definitely learned throughout their startup career is to just see beyond the linear line that's in front of you, just like all possibilities, everything that people see through their eyes, no judgment. And I think that's so important moving forward, because you just never know what you're going to encounter in the startup world. I was going to ask you what your leadership style is, but I think I'm already kind of getting a sense of what it looks like in terms of feedback, curiosity. But what are those values? Are those the values that you're bringing to the team when you're building up Phase?
Yeah. What's so interesting? I was talking with Georgie and Sam about this last week. I have never had a male boss or manager.
Really?
I have only ever had female bosses or managers. I think it's probably a reflection of the wellness industry. But then in my last company, our CEO was a woman. And so I think that has immensely shaped how I show up as a leader, because I value decisiveness and assertiveness and confidence and sort of all of those, I would say, kind of traditional leadership traits. And I value having a high EQ, being able to talk in an emotionally intelligent way to my team, and creating a space where ideas are welcome, challenging ideas are welcome, for the betterment of the business. Does that mean I have to make hard decisions sometimes? Absolutely. Does that mean I have to make people upset sometimes? Yes, absolutely. But I think my leadership style is collaborative as much as possible, to the point where someone needs, to make a decision or to progress things forward.
And on that note, if you were to speak to Maggie McDaris of 2021, what would you say to her as a piece of advice moving forward before entering this?
It's going to get better. 2021 is when I had my daughter, so I was in the thick of it. I think I would tell her, you have no idea what you're capable of. 2021 me was very self-deprecating, in the sense of, if you can't tell, I can sometimes get navel. I'm very introspective. I like to understand my motivations and what's going on. But sometimes that means I can put ceilings on myself and say, oh, well, this is how I operate, or this is how I'm wired, so XYZ limitation. And I think what I would tell 2021 me, that is really great information to have. But whatever you're learning about yourself, use it as a tool to move forward rather than a tool to keep you from moving. Any application of sort of introspection or insight should be applied to progress, not used as an excuse to keep progress from happening. And that has been a huge learning for me over the past couple of years.
And that's kind of what I sense as a takeaway from Phase as well, is to not use it as a barrier, and see that maybe you're not at your best today, but kind of use it to maybe just feel okay that you're not at your best today.
Yeah, so that has been one of the most exciting and enlightening, speaking of leading with curiosity, pieces about the feedback we've been getting from beta users is the grace it gives them to feel okay not showing up as their, or showing up at work in a way where they don't feel at their best. It's given them language, it's given them understanding, and a lot of self-compassion within that space. And that was something we didn't anticipate with Phase. We sort of assumed it would be a lot of high performers wanting to hack productivity, wanting to hack performance. And what we found is that a lot of our users, yes, they leverage Phase in a very practical way to help them align their work with their cycle, but they also leverage Phase to help them give language not only for themselves and how they're showing up at work, but also for members of their team or other people in their life. And that's been a really fun learning for us, and one that now we're leaning into from a messaging standpoint, from a data standpoint, understanding how the self-esteem aspect of giving women tools that are actually built for them impacts their productivity. And there's a huge opportunity for us as we continue, as we launch Phase, as we start collecting data about how our users are engaging with Phase, to tell the story of self-esteem, confidence, and the impact that has on productivity outside of the more, I would say linear data points we're going to be looking at, which is improving productivity because you're working in a way that's aligned with your cognitive strengths.
Well, listen, I'm no salesman, but I think I've got a lot of my friends on board with Phase recently in the past few weeks. So they're all looking forward to it.
You are a salesman.
Yeah, kind of. I don't know how, but it's worked. But I don't think you have to sell it too much because it is a really cool concept.
Yeah, we're really excited.
But that said, we are running out of time.
Okay.
Is there any one last thing that you want to leave with the audience or with your future self, past self, anything of the sort?
I think that the one thing I'd want to leave with the audience is to get excited about what we're going to see in the productivity space when we start to look at how your biology impacts how you show up at work. Phase is a first step. Phase is, and especially for women who have been forced to fit within, a 9-to-5 knowledge worker schedule where they have to show up every day. That's not really how our biology works. We're starting with women. We're starting with, here is a rhythm and a fluctuation. And, we really want to shift the narrative around your cycles in the workplace from something you have to hide or, hiding your tampons up your sleeve to it being really a strength and a superpower that you can access. That being said, that is one biological element. Something that really gets us excited at Phase is the future of biology-based productivity when we apply circadian rhythm and when we look at other infradian rhythms, and how this is just step one in looking at the human body, how it was meant to work, and ways we can reorganize the corporate structure to accommodate that.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, my takeaway from that is go know yourself. Go learn about yourself.
Yep.
And do good things.
Exactly.
Big things. Okay. Thank you for joining us, Maggie.
Thank you so much. It was lovely.